As a salon or spa owner, cosmetology school gave you the skills to serve clients, but it definitely didn't teach you how to run a business. Somewhere along the way, you probably thought ownership would mean freedom, but instead you're working more hours than ever, barely paying yourself, and low-key worried everything's going to fall apart the second you step away. Welcome to the Beauty Biz Breakdown, where we give you the real strategies, systems, and structure that you need to fully step into the CEO seat in your beauty business. Hey friends, welcome back to the Beauty Biz Breakdown, the go-to podcast for salon and spa owners who are ready to build a more profitable, more predictable beauty business. I'm Brie, and as always, I've got the amazing Chandra here with me today. Hey girl.
Hello. How's it going?
It's going good. I'm sunburned. We had a garage sale or a rummage sale or whatever you want to call it this weekend, and I am done. Never again in my life. It's been so hot here in Texas, but you know, it is what it is. So let's get into it. All right. So today we need to talk about payroll, but not in the same way that we did a few months ago. I really think the beauty industry has normalized some very, very dangerous payroll habits, and we've been doing it for a really, really long time. And a lot of salon owners, they either don't realize how exposed they are right now, or they do realize it and they're just continuing to do it and hoping that it just never becomes a problem for them. So for just a little bit of clarity for everybody out there, today's episode is definitely going to be geared more towards commissioned salon and spa owners that have W-2 employees. Now, if you're sitting out there and you're thinking, well, my team is on commission, but they're 1099s, that's actually a completely different conversation. We did an entire episode on misclassification and all the issues that come with that. It was called, If This Is How You Pay Your Salon Team, We Need to Talk. So definitely go back, check out that episode. It's going to be important for you to listen to that. One quick thing also before we dive in too deep today, Chandra and I have spent years owning salons, coaching salon owners, and studying these topics because they are super, super important. But at the end of the day, we are not attorneys and we do not work for a payroll company. So we're not giving any sort of legal advice here. We are simply sharing what we've learned through experience and what we've seen helping thousands of owners over the years. Payroll laws, they are going to vary from state to state. So if you have specific questions about your situation, you need to make sure that you reach out to an employment attorney or a payroll professional that is in your area. Definitely. In fact, as much as Chandra and I know, we still reach out to those people quite frequently. Okay, Chandra, you've owned a salon for a long time. You've worked with a lot of salon owners on the business side. When it comes to payroll specifically, in your experience, is this something owners are generally confident about, or is it more of a just figure it out as you go situation?
You know, it's funny because I feel like they are confident about it, but they don't have a clue. And they're trying to figure it out as they go. So I feel like a little bit of both. Because when we talk to them, they are so confident about the way that they're doing things. And you're like, no, you really don't have a clue what you need to be doing.
I think that's 100% accurate because it's so funny. That's the exact way that I answered that question to myself. And I think it's actually part of why this has become such a widespread problem, because there's this false confidence around it, right? People think they know how this works because they've been doing it a certain way, or because another old owner told them that it was fine and nobody's questioning it. So today we are going to pull that apart in a lot of different ways, and we're going to talk about it. So here's where I think we should start. Not every owner who is out of compliance with payroll law got there the same way. That's just how it is. There are really 4 types of owners that Chandra and I see when it comes to the payroll stuff that we are going to be talking about today specifically. The first type is the owner who genuinely has no idea at all. They open their salon, they set up commission because that's what salons do. Nobody ever sat down with them and explained how federal wage law actually applies in their business. They're not doing anything wrong on purpose. They just don't know what they don't know. And honestly, I think this is probably the most common one. The second type is the owner who copied somebody else. They worked at a salon that did payroll maybe a certain way, or you know what Chandra and I always say, they asked somebody in a freaking Facebook group and they just did whatever they told them. The problem is a lot of what gets passed around in this industry as payroll advice is 100% wrong. And so now people are running non-compliant structures with total confidence because they got it from someone who seemed like they knew what they were talking about and doing. The third type is the owner who thinks straight commission is just simpler and more appealing. They've decided that offering, that flat 45, 50% commission is a great recruiting tool. And the idea of tracking hours feels complicated. It feels unnecessary. So they just don't do it at all. And they've been doing it that way for years with no consequences. So they just think they're fine. And then there's the fourth type. And I'm going to call this one out directly because it needs to be said. This is the owner who absolutely knows. They know their payroll structure isn't legal. They know they're not tracking hours the way that they're supposed to be. They know that if somebody looks really, really closely, there would be weeks where their employees were not making minimum wage for every hour that they were on the clock. And they are banking on the fact that nobody is going to report them. They are hoping that it never becomes a problem. That is so freaking dangerous because the risk, it is real and it is going to compound over time. Chandra, which of these four do you think is the most common when you're working with salon owners? And which one do you think is the hardest to reach with the information?
I really think the ones that just don't fully have a clue at all are the hardest because they sort of think they know because they, like you said, they've gotten information from other places or somebody else is doing it a certain way and they're copying that and they think that's the way it needs to be. Because some of those conversations that we have with those owners, I'm like, I feel like we have them 10 times, 10 different ways before they finally are like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So I feel like that just seems to be for sure the hardest.
I would agree with you there because we have had those conversations over and it's like beating a dead horse sometimes. And we love our members. Do not get us wrong, but it's just sometimes when you've done something a certain way for so long, it's like you just have this mental block and there's nothing that's going to get through until one day it just finally clicks. I also think the ones that have been doing it the same way for 10 years with zero consequences, those are really the hardest to convince that the risk is real because they think if they haven't been caught, they're never going to get caught. Even when we tell them, look, you could get turned in like tomorrow, something could happen. They're like, I don't know. We'll just see how it goes. So with that being said, I think we need to talk about the actual law and legal side of this, because whether we like it or not, there are actual laws around payroll. And I know that's not the exciting part of a conversation when we're talking about things like this, but it's really, really important. The big one that affects what we're talking about today is the Fair Labor Standards Act, or the FLSA. Everybody should know what this is. It applies to salons. It applies to spas. It applies whether you've got 2 employees or 250 employees. It doesn't matter. And when you strip all of this legal language away, the concept is actually super simple. Your employees have to be paid at least minimum wage for every hour that they are in your business working. The problem is a lot of owners hear that and they immediately think, well, my team makes commission. That is not the question here. The question is whether what they earned during that pay period was enough to cover every hour that they were required to be there. And that's where a lot of payroll systems really start falling apart in the beauty industry because owners are only looking at service hours, not at the hours that they're required to be there. The law isn't looking at that. They're looking at how much they are there in your business, period, point blank. The law is looking at all hours worked. Easiest way to put it, right, Chandra?
Yeah, 100%. I feel like that's super simple.
Yeah. So if you haven't figured it out by now, the pay structure that we are going to focus on today is hourly versus commission, whichever is greater. I'm going to repeat that, whichever is greater. This is the legally compliant way to run a commission salon with W-2 employees. Mic drop, period. No question. So here's the actual mechanic. At the end of every pay period, you run 2 calculations. First, you're going to do the total hours your employee was clocked in, all hours, not just service time once again, and multiplied that by your hourly rate, which must be at or above your state's minimum wage. Okay. Second, you're going to total the commission that they earned for that same period. You compare the 2 numbers. You pay whichever's higher. When it's done correctly, it's going to protect everyone. Your employee always has a floor. And if you don't know what a floor is, go look it up, no matter how slow the week was. And when they're producing, their commission is going to reward them for that. The problem when it comes to this type of pay structure is always the execution. And there are several specific places where I think owners get it wrong the most. And the biggest one, owners are not even having their freaking employees clock in and out. I hear so many versions of this. My stylists set their own schedule, so I just go by the appointment book. I know roughly how many hours everybody works, but none of that is sufficient under the law. I'm going to tell you right now, under the FLSA, the burden of proof for wage compliance is on you, the employer, 1,000,000%. If a former employee files a wage claim and you cannot produce time records, you cannot prove compliance. And wage claims can go back 2 years for an unintentional violation. So many people don't realize that. 3 years if it's found to be willful. That is major information. Every pay period you can't document is a pay period you could owe back wages on. And that adds up really, really quickly. This is also why straight commission without hour tracking is super, super dangerous. Commission feels clean. I get it. They did the service. Here's their percentage. Done. But the FLSA, it requires that when you average out what your employee made against every hour that they actually worked, it meets or exceeds that minimum wage pay every single period. On a slow week, right? Cancellations, training days, a light Tuesday, commission alone is not going to get them there probably. And if you're not tracking those hours, you have no way to know how much you should be paying them. So what do? You just pay them commission anyway, because you don't want to do anything else. Chandra, when you're running your salon or you're working with the owners that we work with in BBA, what does the clock-in conversation actually look like when you're having it? Because I feel like there's a lot of resistance to it, honestly, especially from owners who have a more relaxed team culture. What do you think?
I mean, I think that they are resistant to it. I think that they start having those conversations with their team. Their team hasn't been doing it for a long time, and then they don't want to do it. And it becomes hard to get them in the habit of doing it. And so I think that they just decide that, yeah, it's not important, and like, even with my team, it's funny to me, even when we've brought in stylists who've been in other salons, and I'm like, you have to start clocking in and out. And they think I'm crazy. Like, they've never clocked in and out at these other salons that they worked at, And so it's definitely something in our industry, especially for older people, not older people, people have been in the industry a long time.
Right.
They're just not used to it. And they think it's like weird. And it's really something that we've done wrong for a lot of years. But yeah, it's so important, you guys. I mean, even when it comes to insurance, like if they're in your building and something happens to them and they weren't clocked in, you could risk them not even being covered by like workers' comp or some of those things. So there's a lot of umbrella things that have to fall under that. So I think it's definitely something everybody needs to be doing if you have W-2 employees.
Absolutely. Something that I tend to think of that I hear all the time that the resistance comes from, it usually has to do with culture. They don't want things to feel corporate, right? I think something that owners need to understand is tracking hours. It's not about distrust at all. It's about documentation. But we hear this all the time. We're like, owners will say, well, we trust our team. I know they're there. I know it has nothing to do with that. That documentation, like Chandra just said, is going to protect your employees just as much as it's going to protect you. Problem number 2 is only counting the chair time. And we talked about it a little bit, but the mistake that catches owners who are tracking hours, but only tracking that service time is a really, really big one. They're clocking employees in maybe when the first client sits down and out when the last client leaves. And that's not what you can do. I actually had a salon owner that I coached a few years ago that did this. And I was like, what are you doing? The employee's staying in the building. You've got to keep them clocked in, during wait time in between appointments, during their cleaning, their setup, their breakdown. Everything has to be tracked. I just don't get it. If you require your employee to be at your salon, that time has to be tracked, period. Chandra, why do you think somebody would tell their people to clock in and out when they start with a client and when they finish with a client?
I mean, I think they're really not even necessarily probably trying to be shady in any sort of way, but I think they're just trying not to pay them. I mean, I think they're trying to only pay them when they're working, so to speak, right? Like they're working, so I'm going to clock them in. And now they're not working, so I'm going to clock them out. And I think that's a huge mistake, like in so many ways. And when we talk to owners, and you might touch on this, but when they are like, I can't get my team to clean, and I can't get my team to do follow-up calls, and I can't get my team to do all these things because they're commission and they think they're not being paid, but that's also wrong, you know? And so I think it's also beneficial to the owner to not do those kinds of practices, because then you can actually build that team culture and instead of separating it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to like mandatory trainings, mandatory team meetings, all of those things too, like one of the things that salon and spa owners fight us on quite often is, well, why should I pay them for being there during that time, right? But if you require your employees to attend a meeting, that time is paid, period. Every single minute of it. It doesn't matter if it's before the salon opens, if it's after it closes, if it's on a Sunday freaking morning. If attendance is mandatory and they are W-2 employees, you are paying for that time. You have to. I don't know why people think that when their employees are there and they're training, like if you bring in an educator or hold in-house education days or whatever, you send your team to a class, that it's not time that has to be paid for. I will never understand that. And I think we see that a lot under FLSA. All of that counts, guys. You have to be making your employees clock in and out, and you need to do it. Like, just stop making excuses and just do it, because it's really important. Chandra, the mandatory meeting piece, I feel like this one really, really shocks people when they hear it. I do. I've seen salon owners' faces when we are a one-on-one or coaching calls or whatever it is, and they're like, wait, what? You know? Do you remember a conversation that you had with one of these owners where they just had absolutely no idea? And what was that moment like, trying to explain it and get it through their head that they have to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, they're shocked. They don't understand why, because sometimes the owners, I feel like we think if they're not producing revenue, they're not technically working. And I think that they forget that anything that you require of them, that's their job. So that means they are working. And so I think that shock and that confusion comes in, because they're like, but they're not actually doing any. It's like, no, but they are. You told them they have to be here. So technically they are doing something. And so I feel like that's where, I think that's where the hardest part of it is, to get them to wrap their head around sometimes, that them being in your building is them working and doing their job. And that means you as the owner, again, has to pay them for doing their job, no matter what it is. Even if they don't have a client and they're just sitting there, that's why you want to make them clean, make them do stuff, keep them busy, because they're at work. And so, and I think that's the biggest thing. And I think even with owners have to realize, like, at the end of the day, let's say they worked 40 hours that week and their commission beat their hourly, you still only have to pay them for the 40 hours, as long as everything works out to where they're making it. So it's not like you're paying them extra for this or extra for that. It all falls under the same umbrella. As long as however many hours they worked, they got paid at least minimum wage, you're fine. And that's where I think too, that's another one that I'm always like, you not understand. They're still being paid to do your meeting. It's as long as their, commission equals that, you're fine.
Yeah, it's definitely a very confusing thing for a lot of salon and spa owners out there. I think this is why, we at BBA preach so much about having your systems in place. And it always falls back to systems for me. Like, if you have your job descriptions created, you have your requirements done, you have all of those things, your team has things that they are supposed to be working on when they don't have a client. So that is how you get them, like Chandra said, to clean earlier. This is how you get them to do everything. You are technically paying them, so they need to do something. But if you don't have those job descriptions created, they are not just going to think of things to do on their own, not even close. They are going to sit there, scroll on their phone, and do absolutely nothing. And I'm not talking bad about employees here. It's not their job to figure out what to do, honestly. It's our job as the owner to create those roadmaps for them to follow, so that they can get busier, so that they can get more clients in the door, and so they can hit higher commission by taking care of clients eventually. But you have to do your job as the owner, and you have to have those systems in place. Before we move on too much, I want to say this real quick. If you've listened to this podcast before, you probably caught our episode where we went deep on unethical pay practices, specifically, like I said earlier, around the 1099 misclassification and the back bar deductions. If you haven't heard that one, definitely go find it because we spent an entire episode talking about those topics. So I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about them today, but I think that they do tie into this conversation because some of those same pay practices can create payroll issues for owners if you're not careful. There are a number of ways that commission salons structure pay that range from legally risky to just outright shady. Gonna be completely honest. And a lot of owners, they just don't care, I think. Like, I am getting to the point where I really think they don't care. Everybody makes excuses for them. They didn't know, they knew, and they did it anyway. I think they just don't care when it comes to it. So I want to talk about the one that we've covered before, and that's deducting back bar, color, or product fees before commission is calculated, or skimming a percentage of the service total before the split happens. I don't give a crap whether it's a flat fee per service or a percentage taken off the top. The result is the same. Don't freaking do it. You shouldn't do it, right? It is not something that you do. The business expense belongs to the business, not the employee. And if those deductions push their effective hourly rate below minimum wage or something like that, like, you could be in a lot of trouble if you're not keeping up with things, especially if you're skimming money off the top. Chandra, talk about this one just a little bit. I don't want to go too far into it, but I think this is something that we're seeing more and more and more often. In fact, I made a TikTok video over this and I was blown away by the amount of employees that came into the comments saying, my owner does this. I never knew that it wasn't right.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an old practice in our industry, and I think it was made that way to actually be like, I always call it the smoke and mirrors, right? Like, we're going to pretend like we pay you higher commission, but then you have these fees. And so it makes you look desirable because you have this higher commission, and then you hope your stylists don't actually do the math, right? And so I think that that's just like such a bad way to pay. Just if you can't afford to pay a higher commission, just pay a lower commission. Like, don't sit there and make all these weird things. It's harder for you as the owner to track and to try to do a payroll with this setup. It's harder for your employees to understand exactly how they get paid. And I think it's hard to build a really solid culture with a pay structure like that, because I think it builds distrust in your team eventually, because that's not a good way to pay. And that's not the way you should do it. And like you said, social media, I think salons have gotten away with stuff like this for so long because nobody really knew. And so social media is blowing this all up now. So if you have a team, they're going to find out that this is not a really good way to pay, and they're going to leave, or they're going to start questioning what you're doing, or they might even turn you in if your math doesn't math right. So I think that's the biggest thing. Just stop doing it. Just adjust your commission so it makes sense for your business.
Well, and I'm going to be the honest one here because I always am the loudmouth. I think the coaching companies that are teaching parts and labor and crap like that are absolutely wrong. And I don't think it should happen. I just don't think it's the right way to go about it. I'm never going to take away from my employees, period. As we're talking about some of the shady stuff that people do, one that I've seen kind of happen is deducting from a stylist commission when a client requests a refund or files a chargeback. Now, I know everybody has a different view when it comes to this one. So I want to see kind of what you do in your salon, Chandra, and see if it's similar to what I do in mine. So how do you handle that?
I mean, we don't deduct it from the stylist. The salon eats the cost. And I think that's just one of those things. If you have something happening a lot, then you have another problem that you need to figure out how to fix. Like, if you losing, $50 or $100 randomly once in a while is not going to kill you, but it is going to affect your team. And so I think for us, that's what we do. We just eat the costs. It's not something that happens very often at all. And so, I mean, maybe twice a year, if that, and it's not a big deal.
Yeah, we do the same thing. I mean, that's just how we handle it. That's just what we do. If it becomes an issue with the same stylist, we have a meeting, we talk about it, we do the leadership things that we need to do in order to get the situation under control. But I am shocked at how many salon owners actually take that deduction away from, and sometimes it's 3 weeks later. I'm like, how? It makes no sense. It blows my mind. One of the other things that I thought about, and this is kind of becoming common too, is that Owners are charging employees for things like tools or uniforms. So I don't think that's okay either. Requiring stylists to pay for maybe their own capes or their own brushes or their own branded apparel. I think we should supply what we want them to have for their job. And not everybody agrees with me, and that's okay. But I just think it's the way that it should be. Chandra, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I think they do that because they can't afford it. So if you can't afford it, you have other problems. It's your salon should be profitable to where you can pay for those things for your team. So if it's not, we need to look at some other things.
Yeah, 100%. And this is why knowing your numbers is so important, and knowing what you're doing is so freaking important. However, salon owners choose to negate that over and over and over again. But I promise you, if you will start looking at your numbers, learn how to read them, understand them, you will be able to afford a lot more than what you think when you stop spending, when you're in budget, when you're doing the things that you are supposed to do. So some of these shady things that we talked about, I do want to be very clear about them. They aren't illegal in every state. We are not saying that. We're just saying they're not right, or the majority of them aren't right in our opinion. However, there are some of them that are illegal. And so you really do need to look into that. That's one thing that I don't like about social media. Somebody will say something. Sure, it may be accurate for where they are located in their state or whatever, but that doesn't mean that it's okay for everybody else. And people just run with it and go with it like it's nothing. You know what I mean? Chandra, from the business side, when you look at a salon's pay structure and you see some of these shady pieces layered in, along with people not clocking in and out and doing all of those things, what does that usually tell you about where the owner's head is at financially?
I mean, usually the owner is underwater, right? Like usually they are barely making payroll to begin with, and that's usually the biggest red flag, honestly, because they're so afraid to pay their employees correctly because they're so afraid they won't have enough money to cover payroll.
Yep. And where does it usually stem from?
I mean, it stems from the owner. I mean, they don't know the right way to do it. They don't know how to balance their money correctly. They don't have their pricing set up correctly. They don't have their budget set up correctly. There's no reason that any salon, small, big, whatever, can't afford to pay right if you just make sure that everything is in line to cover everything the way that it needs to be. So if it's not, it's not necessarily that you're need more clients or you need to bring in more money. You just need to balance things better, and you need to know your numbers.
I agree. I think that's the real conversation underneath all of this. I would say the majority of it stems from pricing first and foremost, and then it kind of falls under everything else. That's what we normally see anyway. I don't think salon and spa owners just wake up one day and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm just going to start charging back bar fees or product fees or tool fees or whatever it is. I think what usually happens is the numbers in their business stopped working. Payroll got too high, expenses got out of control, pricing didn't keep up with inflation, the profit disappeared, and instead of fixing the actual problem, owners just start looking for ways to make payroll work. It's just never going to work. I think that's why we always tell our owners that payroll and pricing and budgeting are all connected in every way. Like it's one line all the way across. You can't really talk about one without talking about the other. If your pay structure only works because of deductions and charges that keep chipping away at what your team takes home, the problem is you. That is the common denominator. You know what I mean? And so you really got to start looking at things when it comes to that. Chandra, if you were giving an owner one piece of advice that's out there that has been doing some of these shady practices, or maybe unintentionally, not hourly or commission, whichever's greater, what would be the first couple of pieces of advice you would give to them to start getting in compliance?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first things I would look at would be like their payroll structure and seeing exactly how they're paying everybody, and then what can they afford to pay? Like, where are we at? Because I feel like that's where we start picking apart and we start finding those little things when we start working with owners and they're in those situations. And I think they just have to understand that what's real, what's legal. If you want to build your dream team, if you want to build a successful salon, you have to have happy employees who are making way more than a livable wage, at least a livable wage, right? And so I think really getting them to wrap their head around that and understanding I just think they forget. They get so bogged down in everything that they're dealing with. The employees just need to make more money, need to make more money, and they don't realize like that has to go both ways a little bit. You have to also be in their benefit and making them more successful.
And you as the owner, you've got to be tracking everything, all the hours, running the comparisons, every pay period. I mean, most of your CRM systems are going to do this for you if you'll just set it up the right way. You've got to be keeping records on everything. You have to have documentation. You have to have proof that you are doing things correctly. I'm going to tell you this. I would much rather spend 10 extra minutes running payroll than spend months dealing with a wage claim, an attorney, or the Department of Labor later on. Like, that ain't happening. That's why I do it. And this is why we teach in BBA, hourly or commission, whichever is greater. It's the law anyway. So we just drill it into people's heads. I think when you have all the pieces, that peace of mind is worth an extra 10 minutes at payroll time. It really is. And the owners who get into serious trouble are the ones running commission salons without any infrastructure to back it up. And it's going to become a bigger and bigger issue because social media is bringing everything to the forefront 100%. All right, so let's make all of this kind of practical. Here's exactly what needs to be in place to run a legally compliant commission structure with W-2 employees. First, a time tracking system. Every employee clocks in and clocks out for every single shift, not just service time. I'm going to say that a million times. Total time on the premises. Your software will do this. And don't be so crazy to not let them use their phones to clock in and out. Come on, people. Like, we get people that ask us this all the time. And I'm like, let them use their phone to clock in and out. That's not a big deal. Chandra, why do people make such a big deal over that?
I don't know. They just don't trust their employees, I guess, which is a really big problem. I mean, you're going to know when you do payroll. And if you see that somebody's abusing it, right? Like we had that happen one time. We had somebody clocking in on their phone when they weren't even at the salon. But it's so easy to catch because you know what they're pretty much working. And so you're like, what? There's no way this person worked this many hours. You go and you look at the time clock and you see the times that they've clocked in and out. And you know what they're doing. It's not that hard. And if you give them that freedom, they're so much happier. Like overall, your team is happier. Maybe you have one bad egg once in a blue moon, but do you want everyone else to be happy? Those are the little things that make a difference.
The second thing that you need to have is a written compensation agreement with every single employee. It needs to spell out what your commission rate is, what that looks like, the hourly rate, how and when you're going to calculate, how the deductions work, what the pay schedule is, all of that. Both parties need to sign it. So if you ever make a change, you have to have a new agreement. You keep a copy. This is not optional. This is what is going to protect both of you if there is ever a dispute. And at some point in your career, there is going to be a dispute of some sort. Third, you need a pay per period calculation. Some CRM systems may not do this. So you need to figure out a way to make sure that you can run the math, get the numbers, do whatever you need to do. Fourth, make sure your hourly rate is at or above your state's current minimum wage. You need to check this. Minimum wage is changing all the time in all the states. It's almost hard to keep up with, to be honest. So you need to make sure that you are in compliance that way. And fifth, you need to go back and make sure that employees did not forget to clock in for meetings and things of that nature. I have actually had this happen many times in the past. And it's people that are growing. Usually they're newer to the team. They're doing things and they just forget sometimes. I am not going to shorten my employee 3 hours if they were there. Like, it's my job as the owner to make sure that they're doing it. Yes, I understand you don't want to babysit. I totally get that. But you know what? When you're in the CEO seat of your beauty business, you have the time to go back and look at those things because you're not focused on the clients all the time. If you are not sure whether your current setup is compliant, you need to talk to somebody ASAP. I don't care who it is. Find a business coach, talk to them, find an attorney after that, talk to them, get a conversation on record. It's going to be super important. Chandra, from everything that we've kind of talked about today, if you had to pick one thing that most commission salon owners could do this week that would immediately reduce their exposure, what would it be?
No, I think that would be the thing that I would have them start making sure that they're doing is tracking all of the hours and the things that people are doing in their business. And I think it takes a while. It does, especially if people haven't been doing it. Like when we started really doing it in my salon, it took me a while. It was a babysitting job. But once you started getting it and figured out, everybody's doing it, it becomes a habit, then it's actually not a big deal. So it just takes a couple months of hounding them and then they get it. But I think you need to even know how many hours people are actually working in your business. You probably don't even know. And so I think that's one of the first things I would say if you just want to start taking a step in the right direction, start having people clock in so you can at least start seeing what everything's going to look like.
Well, and I'm going to bring this up again, even though I brought it up a million times. If COVID taught us nothing, it was to clock in and clock out, period. Right? I know so many people who got turned down for unemployment because their employees were never clocking in and out. They had no idea how much they worked, how much they should have made, all of those things. And it could happen again very, very easily. That's the best way to sell it to your team, honestly. In all honesty, it is to say, look, this is to protect you in case something like that ever happens again. Really, really important. All right, guys, we're going to wrap up. But before we close out, let's get to our listener question of the week. Shelly from Arkansas writes in and she says, my husband says I never stop talking about the salon. He says, even when I'm physically home, I'm mentally still at work. I know he's right, but I also feel like if I stop paying attention, everything's going to fall apart. This is starting to affect my marriage of 12 years in a very serious way. What do I do? Chandra, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, I understand this 1,000,000% because I get into that trap frequently sometimes. Even after I know how not to do that anymore, I'll still kind of get in that. But yeah, I think you just really have to separate work from home life. Like there just has to be work life, home life. And if you're that thinking about the salon that much, even when you're at home, you also mentally, not even just for your relationship, but mentally, you need to be able to turn that off and actually take part in your life. And so I think that's one of the biggest things is you really do have to, like, that's what I do. I compartmentalize. Work stays with work and home stays with home. And I mean, you don't want to hear about your husband's job all day long either, probably. So it's like the same thing, right? So he probably doesn't want to keep hearing about all your stuff either.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great point. One thing that I've noticed over the years is that a lot of salon and spa owners specifically, they accidentally tie their entire identity to their business. They don't just own the salon anymore. They become the salon, right? The good days determine whether they feel successful. The bad days determine whether they feel like a failure. A great month makes them feel confident. A bad month makes them question everything. When your identity gets so wrapped up in the business like that, I think it's really, really hard to disconnect because you take everything personally. I remember years ago realizing that every conversation I was having somehow ended up back at work. And this was with my husband. Every thought led back to my salon. Every problem led back to it. It was like my entire world had slowly shrunk down to one thing. And that was really, really sad. So just be careful that you don't do that. Most of us out there are business owners. We're wives. We are friends. We're mothers. We're daughters. We're grandmothers. We're all of these things. And we deserve to be able to be those things. You have other roles in your life that deserve that attention. And I think this is a really, really important conversation that does not get talked about enough, honestly, because when the business becomes the only thing that you're feeding, eventually everything else is going to get neglected. One of the healthiest things that you can do as an owner is build a life that has things in it besides your business, hobbies, relationships, date nights, family night, church, travel, whatever fills your cup outside of work, and schedule time for it the same way you would client appointments in the beginning. It is the best way to build those habits, I think. You just need to get some clarity because you do not want this to upend your life in ways that you can never take back. All right, guys, as we wrap this up, the biggest thing that we want salon owners to walk away understanding is this. The way payroll has been done in this industry for a long time is not the same thing as the way it is supposed to be done on a legal basis most of the time. The FLSA doesn't care how you learned what you learned. It doesn't care how long you've gotten away with it. It doesn't care if everybody else in the market is doing it that way. They care about the law, period. And if you don't start doing things right, I promise you it's going to bite you in the butt in the end if you're not careful. If today's episode made you think, okay, I may need to take a closer look at how I'm running payroll or just running my beauty business, this is exactly what we help beauty business owners do at the Beauty Biz Agency. Understanding your numbers, building compliant systems, creating a business that actually supports the life that you've been working so hard for. So head over to our website, thebeautybizagency.com, explore some of the resources that we have. We've got a ton of free ones there. Look at our coaching options or just book a free strategy call with us. We can help you figure out your next steps. If this episode made you think just a little bit differently, please share it with another salon owner who needs to hear it. This is genuinely one of the topics that can protect somebody's business. Also, don't forget to leave us a 5-star review so we can have other people find our show. And then don't forget to subscribe so you can keep up with everything we have going on at the Beauty Biz Agency. Chandra, how do they do that?
Yeah, make sure you're following us on all social media platforms at the Beauty Biz Agency on Facebook and Instagram, and the Beauty Biz Mentors on TikTok. And, send us a message. We'd love to answer any questions you have on the air and stay connected.
All right, friends, that's a wrap on today's episode of the Beauty Biz Breakdown. Payroll compliance is not the most glamorous part of running a salon, but it is one of the things that can quietly take down a business that an owner has worked incredibly hard to build. You deserve to run your salon with confidence, and that means knowing that the way you're paying your team is actually protecting you, not putting you at risk. Now go out there, make bank, run the show, and ditch that chair. And as always, keep slaying those business goals with a whole lot of swagger. If this episode lit a fire under you, don't just walk away and let it die out. Deep down, you already know where you want your business and your life to go. And the truth is, the only thing standing between where you are and where you want to be is a real plan to get you there. That's exactly what we help you build. So if you're ready to stop trying to figure it out on your own, head to thebeautybizagency.com and book your free strategy call. That call can give you the clarity that you've been needing and a real plan to move your business forward. Because at the end of the day, the only thing standing between you and the salon business you've been dreaming about is whether or not you're willing to take the action and the steps in order to build it.